Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Connections with myself, Cameron Bunch, and my father, Dr. Randy Lane Bunch. I'm glad I'm able to join you this week because it was very touch and go for me. On Sunday, as many of you may have experienced across, if you've been on the West Coast or in California specifically, in California, over 400,000 people lost power on Sunday and Monday. And I was one of those people, and it came back on, like it lost it Sunday, came back on for 30 minutes, lost it for the rest of Sunday, came back on like some point like Monday afternoon, lost it Monday night, came back on Tuesday, and has so far stayed back on. And then for internet, which is how we do these recordings, it went off Sunday and came on today, and then was going off today and coming on and going off. And finally, I think it's here to stay, hopefully. But it's been a bit of a chaos with all the storms and rain and uh, trying to figure out what you do with your food in the fridge and the freezer. And then we have water coming into our house and all this other stuff. So I'm glad to be joining you guys for the 85th episode of Connections. Last week, we talked about February, where resolutions go to die. And we were talking about the fact that most people, when they hit February, they've given up on their goals. Normally, you get through week one and you're like, yeah, I'm doing good. Week two, you're like, yeah, it's fine. Week three, you start to, well, I could miss a day here or there. And by a fourth week in January, you're done. And so February, you're toast, you're gone. But we were bringing up the point that even if you messed up your January, you still have so much time left in the rest of the year. So if you're curious about where we are in our resolutions, and I shared where I am currently, and as of today, I think I'm down 15 pounds for the total of the year. So we're continuing on our resolutions. I found out today, to give you another update on one of my resolutions of building down payment towards a house. I have an estimated idea because I'm a person that likes to run numbers for the fun of running numbers. And my dad, that would drive him insane. But to me, playing with numbers is so fun. Um, but I was looking at my down payment, how far away, and I'm looking at the tax return we're going to get. And I didn't think about the fact that having a kid changes your tax returns like crazy.
Yeah.
So hopefully, our my goal to hit the down payment for our house is going to come many months earlier than I anticipated. So goals are going well. But if you're curious on what we talked about last week for February, where resolutions go to die, go check it out. This week we're switching gears as we often do, and we're talking about something that we've talked about before, and it's the good, the true, and the beautiful. Now, the reason we're bringing this up again is that in apologetics, I think, and this is a very common phrase in apologetics, but I think the focus really, if we're honest, tends to be on the good and the true. And so we are going to go over that a bit today, but we also want to take a heavy focus on the beautiful. Um, and we'll get into more about it, but I think there's a lot of scripture and just even a philosophical, even more emotional argument to be made about the beautiful. And I think oftentimes in our culture, we can get very heavily inundated with facts and information and truth. And those are good and they're wonderful and they help us know that we're not just being led by feelings. However, feelings are a God given thing and they are meant to be felt, expressed, explored, and beauty in the world is made for a reason. Um, I mean, if think about it for the story of Esther, if Esther had not been someone that was objectively found beautiful, she could not have been used for the purposes of God. So we're going to talk about some of the things tonight around the beautiful, but let's start off with getting going with talking about the good. So how would you define the good in the, I guess, the apologetic argument, how they're broken down? Maybe we can break down all three and then start discussing the good.
Yeah, the good, the beautiful, and the true. I'm about to have a book called The Good, the Beautiful, and the True. And these are, I guess you could say, metaphysical aspects of God's nature and character that we, to some degree, share with Him because we're made in His likeness and image. I want to go back a step, Cameron, and talk about something that was really a revelation to me. It's something that's kind of a primer, maybe, for people that are deep in Christian philosophy, but philosophy really just has to do with your worldview and how you see the world. A lot of times, Christians, particularly some of us in our charismatic camps, get really turned off when people start talking about things like philosophy. But the fact of the matter is, everybody's got one. And a philosophy is just simply the way in which you see the world and how you negotiate it with the wisdom given to you. Philosophia, philosophy, just means the love of wisdom. So we all have a way in which we approach the world, way in which we see the world, and that really comes down to our personal philosophy. And of course, there's a whole branch of study on philosophy. I remember somebody humorously saying, "What's the difference between somebody who has a degree in philosophy and a pepperoni pizza? One of them can feed a family of four." So oftentimes, philosophical degrees are not considered very relevant in many ways. But if I were to go back to school and study anything other than theology, it would definitely be philosophy, because with philosophy it has to do with critical thinking. It has to do with ideas. The most powerful things in the world are not guns, are not weapons, they're ideas. And we say sometimes ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims. And so everybody is governed by certain assumptions that we have, ideas that we have. And when the ancient Greeks looked at the universe, Cameron, they understood that there's a real inherent order to this thing. Our sun goes up, our sun goes down. The stars and the earth rotate, we understand today. Then they saw it different. They saw more of a earth-centric universe. But nevertheless, the idea was they saw a certain pristine order to this, a regularity to it. And they had a word for it called the logos. And to the Greeks, one facet of Greek thought was that the logos was the ultimate wisdom. But to the Stoics, it was the rational principle behind the universe. And they saw it as kind of an impersonal rational principle. It was just there. It's what made things work. That's why they believed every planet was a perfect circle, because a circle is a perfect shape. And so there was this idea that there's this rational principle behind the universe. They didn't see it, I don't think, necessarily as a personal intelligence. But then John comes along and says, in the beginning was the word, the logos, and the word was with God, and the word was God. So he said, I can explain that rational principle behind the universe for you. It's a person. His name is Jesus, and he helped to create the universe in which you live. And one of the things that was fascinating to me as I began to think about this idea of a wisdom behind the universe, I realized that we understand in the physical realm, Cameron, that there are certain, laws of physics, for example, that govern physical reality. And there's certain laws of physics you cannot transcend. We understand something about laws of gravity. We understand, laws of motion. We understand, for example, that we can't time travel or travel at the speed of light because matter can't approach the speed of light. There's a lot of things we begin learning as we study physics, and we understand that because the laws of physics are so finely tuned, we have a universe that can support life. And we're not necessarily trying to get into all that, but just a point to say that there is a substructure, an internal structure that you can't see with your eyes, but you can understand it mathematically and so forth and so on. But it's this law that's built into the way that the planets go, that the universe is created, so that it's self-perpetuating, I guess you could say, self-sustaining. Not that God does not have a hand in still the maintenance of the operation of the universe, but he baked in, if you will, the laws that govern it. In the same way, there are metaphysical laws. There are things that deal with moral truth, objective moral realities. That's what we would call the good. That speaks to our moral properties. Then there's that which is real. What is reality? We have all sorts of shows today, like Inception and other shows that play with this idea of bending reality, bending time, Interstellar. Of course, that actually draws on the laws of physics to do that. But then we understand that there are some things that are real and that can happen, and there's some things that are not real. We bend reality in things like sci-fi movies and so forth and so on, because we like the idea of playing beyond the boundaries, beyond the possibilities that are out there. And of course, some things are limitations only because we haven't perceived how to go beyond where we are. But some things are hard, fast, rules of reality. Things are just the way they are. And so I began realizing that, of course, there's an assault on all these things. There's assault on the good. Isaiah said there would come a time, Isaiah 5:20, where men would call good evil and evil good. They would substitute light for dark and vice versa, the bitter for sweet. And we're obviously in that time. And not only is there an assault on good, where people are trying to flip-flop good and redraw the lines of more objective morality to suit themselves, but we're also in a time where people are trying to do the same thing with reality. In fact, it's interesting that in 2016, the Oxford Dictionary word of the year was post-truth. In other words, there are no hard, fast realities. I can shape reality to suit myself. The best example of this in our modern culture would, of course, be the gender fluidity idea that if I decide I'm a woman, I can be a woman just by, snap presto, snapping my fingers and pretending that it's so. But it doesn't reshape reality. I like to say that a child has a better chance of causing the earth to rotate in a different direction by pushing on the side of his house than we have a chance of changing the realm of reality by wishing it so. It's just the way God made it. And the proof of the pudding is in this idea of, for example, in gender fluidity, even when people have taken this delusion to the point where they've actually had reassignment surgery to change genders, the suicide rate actually goes up. It doesn't go down. In other words, in fulfilling these carnal desires and quote unquote reshaping reality to suit themselves, it doesn't help them. It actually ends up hurting them. Why? Because they're smashing into that hard, unrelenting wall of reality that does not bend at a whim. It is the way God made the universe. And so there are certain things that are just objectively so. And maybe it would help for a moment to explain the difference between subjective and objective. When we say something is objectively true, what do we mean? Let me give an example that I give when I'm teaching on apologetics or biblical worldview, wherever it happens to come up. If I were sitting in a classroom and let's say we had a semicircle of seats like a crescent moon, and all the students are facing me, and between me and these students, right in the middle of the room, was a big, giant, pink beach ball. The proverbial elephant in the room. Can't miss it, right? So there it sits. And I told everybody, now shut your eyes. So they'll shut their eyes. And I asked them, now, is the beach ball still there? And they say, yeah, the beach ball's still there. We just can't see it. Okay, now turn your back on the beach ball. Is the beach ball still there? Yeah, it's still there. Why? Because it's just objectively true. It doesn't matter whether you believe it's true. It doesn't matter whether you see it. It's just there. It's just the way it is. That is objective reality. It just is what it is. Then there is what we call subjective reality. Subjective reality means it's subjective to the person is one who determines that reality. A great example of this would be, what's the best flavor of ice cream? Well, you say tomato, I say tomato, right? Somebody says chocolate, somebody else says vanilla, somebody else says strawberry. Well, who's right? Well, it's subjective. It depends on the perspective of the individual. And what we've tried to do is to subjectivize objective reality. And so, as we said, the Bible's clear that God made them male and female, male and female, he made them. And of course, that was the plan of God. It's the way he orchestrated it. And that's an objective reality. That's the truth sitting in the middle of our cultural classroom today, if you will. And yet people want to subjectivize it and say, no, I can change it just like I can personalize my license plate. I can personalize my gender. I can decide what is what. But the fact of the matter is, it's a perfect example of the old Aesop fable. I think it was Aesop, the emperor's new clothes, where everybody just has this groupthink delusion that the emperor is wearing these wonderfully fine garments when they're all simply being taken in. And it takes the innocence of a child to finally point out and say, hey, the dude's naked. and the fact of the matter is, this ideological emperor is wearing no clothes, but yet it's still being pushed as reality in our society. And of course, now, not only are you supposed to swallow it, but you get canceled if you don't accept it. And I'm amazed at the amount of people that are willing to kind of jump into this conspiracy and deny reality. And in denying reality, then of course it becomes these things bleed over to one another. It also becomes easier then to deny objective moral truths. And we talk about the moral argument for God. You're asking, how do we define good? And good is simply defined by that which is in line with the character and nature of God. God himself is good. And so all that agrees and is in alignment with him and his values, his nature and character is good. That which stands opposed to God is not good, or it's evil. And so, of course, there are people, again, wanting to rewrite that because they don't want there to be consequences for their actions and for their choice of behavior. And one of the things you and I well know, Cameron, that we talk about a lot is a lot of the intellectual arguments that propose that there is no God, whether they're arguments from science or philosophy, are really just a cover up. They're a mask, they're a facade to shield the real true conviction, which is really a desire for moral autonomy. I don't want there to be a God because if there's a God, I'm accountable for the way I'm living or for my sin or for the things I'm doing that are contrary to his commands and his character. And so we're familiar a little bit more, like you said, with what is true, what is real, and what is good, what is right or wrong. But the real issue surrounds beauty. Before we get into that, I'm going to let you have an opportunity to respond to just what I've said so far.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I want to hit on is a point that you made, that no matter what, when you try to clash against the original intent of a creator's creation, there's going to be ramifications that occur. Um, and that's in any type of reality we encounter. I mean, for example, right now my TV in the back is displaying static, and it's because the between power coming in and out, internet coming in and out, a program that had been like left on for my daughter to like listen to music, it timed out. After a while, the intent and design of that TV is to continue to play something. If something times out, it all of a sudden doesn't know what to do, and now there's a ramification of static playing in the background. And the same thing happens with the more complex and fundamental the creation is, the more it can backfire. So let's look at example. Power is something that's been shaky up here. The reality is when we had high winds, power lines can snap, water can damage things. And I think it was shortly after I moved here to this area up here in Placer County, the Paradise fires happened. How did those occur? Well, PG&E had power lines and one of them snapped. And power is an essential creation. Well, the way we've done it is a man-made alteration of this creation. And because it's so powerful and essential, when it's used in a negative context, it rebounds hard. And so, as many of you know, Paradise was wiped out. Now they're rebuilding, of course, but the same thing is true about the reality of our world. When we try to deny truth, it's kind of like a lot of my friends, when I'm at a crosswalk, I wait. Even if it's a crosswalk that I have right of way and I can walk whenever, I wait. And it bothers a lot of my friends. And like, you have right of way. And my statement every time is a 2-ton vehicle has a right of way over my body. And the reality is, I know that is true. That vehicle is heavier than me. It will run me over like I am nothing. And the fact is, in life, in creation, God has set certain laws into motion. And when we break them and when we go against them, it ends up hurting us all the more. And I want to emphasize this because I think a lot of times people think I can have my own truth. It's like I can have my own cake and eat it too. Well, yeah, you can have a cake and eat it too. And you can keep doing that. But what's going to happen? You're going to get huge and you're probably going to develop diabetes and a terrible health habit. But that's just metaphorically. But in the reality is, when people think they can have their own truth, well, what happens? Our brains aren't wired for it. I mean, there's been studies that show when we don't operate within the way that a healthy brain should operate, and we start trying to take on lies and things that just aren't objectively true, it ends up hurting us. And like you mentioned, people that have denied their gender and say that they are a different gender, they end up going through these extensive, expensive processes to switch their genders. And in the end, they're more miserable than when they first went in, and they end up having higher suicide rates. And it's because you cannot bend your creation, you cannot bend your intended design. And the more you try to bend and distort what an object was created for, a piece of art was created for, the more you're just looking for trouble. Another example is guardrails. Guardrails are meant to be keeping us well away from them. Obviously, we have lane lines, and then we have rumble strips, and then we have guardrails. Each one of those are indicators to stay within our lane. You wouldn't dream of being like, I want to see how close I can drive to the guardrails without scraping my car. Or when it's icy, I want to see how close I can get to the car in front of me without hitting. You just want to drive your car like that because you know that there's an objective truth that guardrails will scratch your car up and you could fly over them and die, or you could rear end that car and be out a lot of money, your car, and be hurt in the process. There's just objective truth that we have to hold to. And we have to know that God has placed what is good into the world. And oftentimes, there's an old story of like a kid was in a room, uh, and the professor like goes up and he like tells like anyone, does anyone like believe in God, and it's like talks about how you can't see him, can't touch him, can't feel him. Like, so why would you say that there is a God? And the whole kid goes through, well, would you say that that you feel cold? And he was like, do you ever feel cold? And he's like, well, yeah, I feel cold. And he's like, but that's just an absence of heat. And he's like, well, have you ever seen the dark? He's like, yes, I've seen the dark. And he's like, that's just an absence of light. And the reality is that evil is just an absence of good. It's an absence of God's presence, an absence of God's intent and will for our lives. So those were a couple things I wanted to add in there before we move on to the beautiful.
Yeah, and one of the things that I often share when I'm talking about like objective moral laws, in fact, the argument for the moral argument for God is if objective moral laws are true, that means there must be an objective moral law giver. Objective moral laws exist, therefore there's an objective moral law giver. So the reason why is because, and Lewis does this so masterfully, C.S. Lewis in the opening chapter of Mere Christianity, which was actually a series of talks on the BBC during World War II to try to encourage people, with Christian faith. He appeals to this idea of objective moral reality by saying that people try to say, oh, there's no objective moral realities. You can, whatever's right for you is right for you. Whatever's right for me is right for me, until you violate them and their rights. And all of a sudden, people will appeal to this supposedly universal accepted, hey, they did me wrong. They stole my bicycle, or they lied about me, or what are they doing? They're appealing to a universal understanding of a law that's intended to govern all of us. Well, where does that come from? I didn't make that up. They didn't make that up. People said, well, society makes it up. Well, not necessarily, because universally, for example, torturing babies for fun is condemned by any society anywhere, right? And so there are just certain things that we understand are objectively morally wrong. Even in today's culture, the idea of cheating on one's spouse, even in the world, is not applauded. People might overlook it, they might forgive it, they might say, well, he's still a great artist, but they don't praise that, right? Cheating on your taxes, or these are still things that will get you kicked off of a company, a team, right? These are still violations that people recognize as being a deficit of moral character. Well, where does this come from? And why is it so universal? Because it's given to us by a transcendent moral agent, who of course is God. Well, as I'm ruminating on all these things the other day, I'm thinking about all of a sudden this newfound love I have for photography. Now, you and I have been in the video world along with your brother forever, because we did a church, we had broadcasts, so we've been broadcasting forever. But now, when you and I were doing that back then, and your brother was involved with us, and it was all on things like camcorders or video recorders, and they were specifically designed for videography. Well, today, now we have hybrid cameras, like the camera that I shoot with is a video camera, but it's also a photography camera, and it's the best of both worlds in one body now. So I have a Canon R7, and I use it, to film the broadcast. But in more recent times, I've just really been following a lot of influencers that are big on photography, and I've been going out and learning a lot about photography and editing on Lightroom and other programs that I have. And I've just absolutely had a blast with it. Today, actually, I had a friend, one of my fellow chaplains, asked me, Randy, text me those photos you were talking about, because I went on a little trip from Porterville to Glenville, and I found this back way up this old road called Old Stage Road, and it literally used to be an old stagecoach road. And I've actually got them up on my screen. I'd love to share my screen, but I don't want to blow anything here, so I'm hesitant to do it. But I would love to show the photos just because they turned out so beautifully, and I got a couple of some horses against an old barn that were just absolutely gorgeous. In fact, I'm going to probably make some into canvases, and I'd like to make them something that I can hang on a wall. So I was thinking about this, that all of a sudden this appeal and love and proclivity I've had just to enjoy the beauty of nature. And that probably started, Cameron, when I started doing off-roading. And so it started as I'm fellowshipping with the Lord on the way to teach class last night. And for some reason, I'm concerned kind of about this preoccupation I have with photography. Is it taking me away from, more important things, godly things, godly pursuits, ministry stuff? But then I'm thinking about this idea of the good, the beautiful, and the true, and how the beautiful, like the good and like the true, are metaphysical aspects of God's character and nature. And they're passed on to us. We are aesthetic, we are creative, we are artistic because God is. And I'm thinking about this and I'm saying, Lord, why? Why is the beautiful? How does the beautiful point to you? Now, I know some of these arguments, but sometimes it just doesn't seem as relevant as, say, the true and the good, right? These things, we understand the importance of having firm moral laws, for example, to govern society. We understand the importance of understanding reality, like you said. We understand that these boundaries are put there for a reason to protect us. But when it comes to the aesthetic, the arts, and so forth, we can kind of think of them as just entertainment, as ancillary things, as just extraneous, extra stuff that's kind of like, I guess, the flavoring of life, but not fundamentally essential. But yet, these things are always put together, the good, the beautiful, and the true, as aspects of God's character that reveal Him. And so I was having a conversation with the Lord about this. I was saying, Lord, why is that? And all of a sudden, thoughts just began to flood my mind about why beauty points to a creator. Number one, as I was sharing with you, beauty exceeds mere functionality. And one of the photos I took, I would love to get these up. I would like to
Is
get.
it the one of the
Oh,
horse?
hey, I think I can do that. I'm
Is it
looking.
the one of the horse you want me to bring up?
Yeah, desktop. Am I showing anything? Can you see anything?
Not currently.
Oh
If
wait.
you enable sharing, I can pull them up real quick. I have them.
Okay, let me do that. Hold on. You don't have them all, but you've got enough of them to. Hold on. Hold on. Let me do this. I'm going to enable. Okay, you've got them. Go ahead and bring them up if you can. Okay, so there's one of the horses that I took a picture of, just owned by, one of the local families. Go ahead to go to the next one. That's a silhouette of a tree. Of course, these have been photoshopped. I'm not photoshopped, but taking them in Lightroom and edit them. Go ahead and go. There's another one of the horse. I think I sent you two of those for some reason. They're just the mountains, some, beautiful trees kind of in with a mountain in the back. And you can kind of see the austere weather. And then here's, well, it was really cool after I took a picture of that white horse camera, these other horses came and stood in front of it, almost like to say, hey, leave our sister alone or something or whatever it was. But it's kind of cool because they had like this protective instinct, and I don't know if that's the end of them or not. But and then yeah, just some pictures of the next one. When I saw that, I thought, oh, that's right outside Hobbiton. But anyway, so just these beautiful landscapes, right? And so I took these pictures, and then, like I said, I was kind of showing one of my chaplains actually lives up in that area. So I was telling her about it. She was telling me all about. She knows the owner of those horses, for example. And so we were having a wonderful discussion. One of the other chaplains heard me, said, Randy, can you send those to me? Because I ride with a bunch of guys. We like to take our motorcycles and find trails. And so I sent him those. Come to find out, he had a photography business at one time. And so we were talking about putting them on a canvas. And he was telling me, hey, this is what I found when you do that. Make sure you're aware of this, blah, blah, blah. So a good conversation. But again, and it kind of made me feel good because, again, you can share these things with other people. And immediately, that's one of the things I've noticed is in sharing these things with people online, Cameron, everybody, it's like, oh, that's a beautiful picture. Oh, that's so cool. Where did you take that? There's no theological argument. There's no mudslinging. There's no nastiness. People are just mutually enjoying something and here's the point, that they objectively recognize as beautiful. Now, I'm not doing a lot of portraits these days. It's all landscape for me and wildlife. So these are things that people tend to universally recognize as beautiful. But why do they point to a creator? And we inherently know they do. You tell a little kid, look at that beautiful starry sky. And the first thing they don't say, how did those gas balls get formed by, a process of billions of years? The first thing they think is, who did that? Who made that? Who put that there? When we see a beautiful sunset, the sun can rise and set functionally without casting a beautiful array of colors across the sky and color the clouds, everything from magenta to blue to yellow. A woman can carry a baby and walk across a floor without necessarily having a form that we all recognize as beautiful. We look at a woman and we say, she's beautiful. Why? Because it several reasons why. Number one, it points to a God who is himself aesthetic. It reveals that he's personal. He's not robotic. He's not just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just an issue of functionality. There's depth to God's character and nature. He makes things that are beautiful. We have even subjective preferences to some degree. I like red, you like green, whatever the case might be. There's a subjective nature to beauty. We say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And that's true to a certain degree, but there's certain things we just recognize as universally beautiful, like a picture of that horse. Even if I'm not into horses per se, but I can look at that picture of that old barn of that horse and say, boy, that's so cool. And I can see the same thing if somebody takes a beautiful picture of a really well done, 57 Chevy or something like that. I can still say, oh, that's beautiful. I'm not into cars, but I recognize it as something that's the handiwork of someone, right? So why is that? Why does beauty, especially the beauty of nature, natural beauty, point us toward God? Because again, it points us to a God who's personal, who's intentional, who's creative. And not only that, but there's something in us that resonates with that. Deep calls to deep. And there are certain things, as we said, that are just objectively beautiful. And every human being recognizes it. Well, it kind of points to our common creator. It unites us. It unites us more than, like I said, there's something about art, something about beauty, about these photographs that universally unite people. There are certain things that universally divide people, but these are things that universally unite people. And I think there's just something beautiful about, like, for example, if you have a beautiful sunset, right? Like when we lived in Vermont, sometimes you see the northern lights. But if you have a beautiful sunset, people come out on their porches and all of a sudden neighbors are talking to one another, all admiring the night sky. And it brings us into a common appreciation of almost really like a form of worship of the one who put it up there, even though they may not put it in that framework. And so, like I said, a lot of these different thoughts filled my mind. And the reason why I think this is important, Cameron, is because I think oftentimes, particularly in Christian circles, when it's come to the arts, again, we have kind of, and I'm including myself because, man, I'm a teacher of the word. We got to get the truth in people. We got to get knowledge in people. And when it came to the arts, I think we kind of, that's just I don't know, the fruity stuff over there. But how important it is, and music is another great example of this, how it inspires and ennobles and lifts and motivates. You can't hear the theme song to Rocky and not feel motivated, right? But all these are aspects of beauty, creativity that point to a transcendent God who made things beyond functional. He also made them beautiful.
And there's a couple things I want to touch on that you've said. Where do I start? I'll start with there's the verse in the Bible that says, "And yet, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you are the potter. We are all the works of your hand." There's a verse where it talks about, "You knew me in my mother's womb. You knit me together." Uh, there's a verse that talks about, "We are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus." And all of these are creative imageries. And even throughout the Bible, you see parables, stories, imagery given. The Old Testament, we see that Solomon built this beautiful temple and everyone recognized it as a marvelous feat. Why did it matter? Because it pointed to the beauty of God. Pointed to the creativity of God. I mean, in the beginning, God created. He created. He was a creator. And we are created to be imagers of him, to reflect his glory, to reflect who he is. And so creation is in who he is. And the reality is that my brother and his wife were talking about this at one of our leaders meetings recently at church. And they made a comment about how they wanted to start an art program. And it's because if you're an artist and you genuinely want to pursue groundbreaking, beautiful art, most of the communities that support that are riddled with drugs, alcohol, sex, and just terrible things that don't glorify God. But there are two people that love God and want to glorify Him through art. And I think that's beautiful. And I think oftentimes in the church, I think it's gotten better. I think we used to be a decade behind everyone else, but I think we're still about 5 years behind everyone. When you go to listen to music, it's normally not the most cutting edge. It's normally you're going to recognize the same few chords and it's going to go in a certain way and you're going to be able to memorize that song within like one or two times listening to it. It's not something that, I mean, you listen to modern, I shouldn't say all modern music, but a lot of great modern music that people really value. You can't just memorize it the first time you listen through. It takes listening through a couple times and you pick up different nuances and the beauty in the music. Same thing with television. how many of you have watched a TV show you loved and then decided, oh, I want to rewatch it, and then maybe go back again for a third time because it's good. It takes you through a story you enjoy, and it brings out the beauty of life. And I mean, that's one of the things that actors and actresses and their creativity that they've been given are able to evoke these emotions that make us feel deeply. Um, and there's so many times that we encounter like issues in life and we don't give it much emotion, but then when we see it in a movie we're like crying because we're like, it's so beautiful because they depict it so wonderfully. Or you're reading a book and all of a sudden you find yourself laughing out loud even though it's just words on a page, because the creativity came alive and it gave hope, it gave beauty to the world. And same thing like you mentioned with music, how many times that, and have we done scientific studies that show that you can listen to like music when working out that's like upbeat and like pumped up so that you are able to work out harder. Or if you're in a bad mood, you can put on something that's uplifting and it'll bring you out of that. And that's all scientific studies they've done. Even plants respond to different kinds of
Yeah,
music.
that's right.
I mean, our world is designed to respond to beauty, and even the Bible recognizes beauty, refers to Esther as beautiful, refers to Saul as beautiful, refers to Jesus as someone who was not beautiful to behold, which is kind of a slap in the face. Um,
I think though,
and
actually, if you look at the context, it's really it's Isaiah 52. It's really talking about him suffering in on the cross, and there was nothing that we, no reason to behold him,
yeah,
nothing,
no, stately
yeah,
majesty.
yeah. So
Yeah. And so the reality is, beauty is something that we intrinsically hold. And it's interesting because I think culture tries to shift this a lot of what is beautiful. And yeah, I think throughout culture it's shifted slightly, but I think the reality is culture has never shifted majorly in what it finds beautiful in, for example, people. There's still a certain level of fitness that has to be involved. Um, and I think a lot of times Roman sculptures of women get like booed at because the women have a little belly fat on them. But the reality is, most of those women are still very healthy in that context, because normal human does not look like a 8 pack on their abs and like bulging muscle. Like that's a hard physique to attain to. And yeah, it's something that we recognize as appealing now because it's a required level of discipline that it took to get there. In the converse, the reason we don't tend to value like obesity is because it comes out of a trait that is not beautiful, and that's just laziness and slothfulness. And so we tend to value these traits that, again, are based off what is good and true, and it affects the beauty with which we see the world. And you mentioned earlier, like a horse could look just like a stick figure and be the ugliest
yeah,
thing. Why does the design of a horse have to look beautiful as well as its um, purpose to carry a man from point A to point B? And we see this in so many different aspects. Why are there hundreds of variations of trees, thousands, if not tens of thousands, variations of
exactly.
trees, of flowers, bushes? Heck, I don't like bushes, and I'm still like, wow, there's a lot of different types of bushes, and they have different purposes. And some of them are just to be beautiful. They serve no nutrient function, they serve no medicinal function, they serve no real ecological function because animals won't even eat them. They're just there to add beauty to the world. And there's a lot of trees and plants and weeds that do that. And sure, some of those have even deeper purposes of creation and intent to be medicine or food, but a lot of them are just to be behold and to see the world and to see the beauty with which God can create. And I think one of the great things that humans do that is similar to God is that we create and we try to invent and become creative in whatever avenue we're in. I think it's an important aspect of our minds to be building on creativity, be similar to God, because like I mentioned, the first thing we see God doing in the Bible is creating. And we were told to fill the earth and subdue it, which means to take ownership and to maintain and to cultivate it. It is called to partake in the beauty that God created and work alongside him. I mean, we talk about a garden. A garden isn't just naturally beautiful. It takes
Right.
maintenance, it takes work, it takes effort. And we're called at the very beginning, Adam and Eve were to partner with God in the garden and to maintain it, to maintain beauty.
Yeah.
And I mean, still in the Bible, we see that we are the salt of the world, the light of the world. Salt is a preservative to preserve the beauty of the world, to bring light onto the good things. And so beauty is an incredibly intrinsic and important part of our world. And there are things that are beautiful and there are things that aren't.
Yeah.
And I think it was gosh, I might be wrong. Maybe it was Marcel Duchamp. I think he was the the chess player and the artist that like believed that like anything could be art, and he like did the whole like I think it was like a toilet seat or whatever was art. And the reality is, we look at it, and there's so many people like, no, it's not art. And we go into museums, and there's so many people that are like, no, that's not art, because we. But then there are some things that we look at, and we're like, that's breathtaking.
Yeah.
That's stunning. We look at amazing Roman sculptures and we're like, how did they accomplish such beautiful things at that time? We look at some of the paintings, we're like, how did they get such vivid color? And I was watching a video the other day on how they would have to derive some of the colors at that time. And one of them involved finding specific lapis lazuli, or however you say that stone, and it's an incredibly expensive stone. It has a beautiful blue, and they would mix it with egg and a little bit of like white wine, but most of it came from them crushing the lapis lazuli or whatever it is, and crushing it and finding the right shades of that blue and crushing it into a fine powder, and then mixing it with egg, which was the bonding agent, and the white wine to bring a little like liquid and color. And they would find this incredibly deep and rich blue that we still really can't manufacture in the same way, except through finding a new way to be creative with art.
Yeah.
And so I say all that to say that we still marvel at the creativity of people in days gone by. We look at Roman concrete and we're like, how were they so creative to figure out a concrete that was so strong? And creativity and beauty can lie in different areas and in different ways, but there is an intrinsic objective truth behind what is beautiful.
Yeah, you're talking about God's I think it's cultural mandates, what it's called. Andy Crouch wrote a book called Culture Making, and it's a fascinating book. I listened to it. I read it the first time, I think, and then, or maybe I just listened to it. Anyway, it's a fascinating book. It was part of our doctoral studies for people at the Bible college that I teach at. The fascinating book, and he talks about how God told Adam and Eve, tend the garden, and so forth, and subdue it and whatnot. And basically, what he was saying was make something out of the world. And the dream was, the idea was, God's vision was for them to continue to spread the garden, because the garden was the whole earth. The garden was in the earth, but it was just a small portion. It was the beauty place, if you will. God wanted them to continue to expand the influence of the garden, if you will, till it covered the earth. And of course, they didn't accomplish that. But that cultural mandate to make something of the world is still with us. I'll never forget, Cameron, I was talking about a transcendent moment I had. And that's the thing about beauty. It points to transcendence. It points to this idea of a noble creator, somebody that is aesthetic and appreciates beauty and shares that with us, whether it's a sunrise, a sunset, or the birth of a baby. Certain things we just inherently understand are beautiful. And of course, we used to live in Vermont, and I cannot believe that I was not a photographer when we lived there for 10 years, because I could have made my living with calendars, just making beautiful calendars of Vermont by standing in one spot and turning a quarter inch and just taking photographs, and everything's beautiful there. So anyway, but I remember when we had an outreach in Rutland, Vermont. We lived in Burlington. Rutland's in the south. Take about an hour and a half to get there. And I remember on one particular night I had to go alone. And so I was going down, I think it was 126. Anyway, it was a road, one of the highways, wasn't a major artery. It was just a back way through small villages and towns to get down to Rutland. And it was near the end of fall. And for those who don't know, it falls so beautiful in New England, but what they don't tell you in the brochure is that lasts for about 6 weeks, and then you got a 6-month winter. But nevertheless, we were at the tail end of the fall, and my favorite colors are always the reds and the orange. They come out first, and then they fall the first. And then what you're ultimately left with at the end is all yellow. And the yellow's pretty, but I like the other. But I'll never forget, Cameron, I was coming through this valley, and as the sun was setting, I came into this valley that was literally lit. It was like a bowl shape lit with yellow. And with the sun hitting it at the particular angle that it was, it looked like every single leaf was a fluorescent light. And it was maybe one of the most beautiful sights I had ever seen in my life. And it's one of those things where you talk about your breath being taken away. And if I could have just sat in that spot with the light being right there, I could have probably just drunk that sight in for a year. You know what I mean? Just you just don't want to leave it. You want that moment to last forever. You want to capture it somehow, bottle it, take it home with you. And it evoked a moment of transcendence, worship. It so revealed the glory of God. And you think this is a broken world. Those are dying leaves, and yet still the world in its shadow, if you will, is so beautiful. I can't imagine what heaven will be like. And I remember when the aesthetics and the creative power of all this, the things we create really hit home with me, Cameron. I bought one of our, I think it was when I bought the Sony, the camera that we used primarily for video work, at the church. And it was the first really high-end camera that we had, 3 CCD, full production model camera, a couple $1,000, whatever it was. It was a lot then. And I took it downtown Burlington, and I just shot some random shots of people in isolation, sitting by themselves. But this is on Church Street, so there's people all over the place. But I took pictures intentionally. I say pictures, video of pictures of people just sitting alone while people are passing him. One guy eating an ice cream cone, another guy just kind of walking by himself as other people are going in the other direction, and then a lone man taking like his leftovers home. And I remember I took that home, and I had also taken some picture of me driving down the street with a camera just outside so that the trees and houses were flying by. And I took that video home, and it looked like just a random array of nothing. And then I put it in the timeline. I desaturated it to where it's not quite black and white, but void of color. And then I put a very sad Sarah McLachlan song called, was it Something Grace? I can't remember. It's on her first album. Um, it's a beautiful but exceedingly sad song, and about the winter and the coldness of winter and about broken relationships and so forth. But it was the perfect music as a backdrop, right? And so, first of all, just kind of the camera comes on, and it goes from dark to fades into this picture of me just driving by these houses, and then all of a sudden I show the first guy and I slow it all down. It's all slow mo. And then I have Sarah's sad song singing. And then I would show the first person and I'd say loneliness. The second one, isolation, and then something else. And then the very last scene was full color with the light streaming through and talking about Jesus being the answer to all this. Something simple like that. It maybe lasted, I still have it somewhere. It might have lasted a minute, 90 seconds. I showed that on a Sunday just to see what the response of people. I turn around and women are crying, you know, and obviously that was what my goal was, to see what can I do to move people with media. And if you think about it, Cameron, we do that in church. We come to the end of the message and we want to draw people to the altar. We start having the pianist play, or we have the worshipers sing or something, and we create a mood and environment. Spirit of God works with that beautiful environment that we've created and draws on the hearts of men. So aesthetics are not only hardwired into God and his creation, but it, again, deep calls to deep. We respond to it, just like I did that beautiful valley filled with yellow leaves, backlit by the sun, if you will. And just like the people did to that bit of movie making that I did, we do that when we go and see a moving movie. Whether it's Christian or whether it's secular, we're still moved by aesthetic. Now, the devil knows that and uses that for evil. But at the same time, when something is truly beautiful, because I believe there is things that are objectively beautiful. And when you find something that's objectively beautiful, like the picture of that horse or, whatever, I think it always brings glory to God. It points to something beyond itself. It points to the creator who made it.
And I want to bring up the verse in Ecclesiastes that it's Ecclesiastes 3:11, that he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And there's so much to unpack there that, one, the beauty of the world points to the eternity of God. It points to that there is a creator, as we've mentioned. Um, you can't look at the complexity of everything. And I think it was the late Christopher Hitchin that made a comment that one of the most like shaking arguments to his atheism, because for those of you who don't know, Christopher Hitchin was a notorious atheist, one of the like
Four,
proponents for
four
what?
horsemen of atheism. Yeah.
Yeah. And so large proponent for it. But one of the biggest arguments that shook him was the idea of um, fine tuning, which is that you look at the intricacy of the world and how it all just works like a beautiful, complex clock put together, so beautifully orchestrated that everything works in tandem with one another. And you look at it and you can't deny that there had to be some type of influence there. So we see the beauty of God throughout all aspects, and that he has intended everything to be beautiful in time. I mean, even look at, you're just talking about the trees, and you're like, well, what's left at the end? Immediately, I thought brown leaves that I had to rake up in the yard that are ugly and crunchy. Like, and that's the reality of like, you get like the leaves that are beautiful, and then all the people that live in Vermont now have to rake their yards. And for me, it wasn't a great time to rake the yard because we had a lot of property in Vermont that we like were on, but it's beautiful in its time, but it doesn't mean that it lasts forever. And I think that
Right.
one of the things that we can admire about beauty in this world that it is temporary. But the reality is that God is going to have infinite beauty when it comes time to join him in heaven. And then another thing is that it talks about that God, no one can fathom what God has done beginning to end. And when we look at the story of the Old Testament, the New Testament, and what God's doing now, and I've mentioned the song before, uh, from the Prince of Egypt, and it's a song where the guy's talking to Joseph, and he's telling him like that he doesn't know what's worthy of honor. He says, "A single thread in a tapestry, though its color brightly shines, doesn't see its purpose in the pattern of the grand design." And the reality is, the story of God and Jesus that is being woven through history, through each of our lives and our testimonies that we add to it, paints this beautiful tapestry and mosaic of the glory of God, and we all get to play part in that. I mean, each story and testimony you encounter that moves you just shows the beauty of what God can do. And I think so often we take for granted the beauty and the story of life, because we like movies. But the reality is, movies at the end of the day, even when they're based on true stories, they're still fake. They're imitations of what is true beauty. Um, and I mean, even pictures and paintings and sculptures are attempts to capture the beauty that we
Yeah.
encounter in the world and that we see. We're still trying to capture the beauty that God already perfected and we get to watch. And of course, I'm not going to say that everything is perfect in the world because we did fall. It is broken. And as the Bible says in Second Corinthians, I think it is, that Satan is the God of this world. And so not everything is perfect as God designed, but we're still trying to imitate and run after and capture the beauty that God created. And even if that's in, for example, when you're single and you're looking for someone to date, you're looking for beauty first. And I mean, how many people really, it's very rare that people are like, I never saw the individual before I got to really know them and I was in love with their inner beauty. It's like, no, there was something externally that captivated you about them. Does that mean you're shallow? No, it means that there's a certain aspect of us that is drawn to beauty. And the interesting thing is, if you were to line me and all my friends up and say, like, pick someone that's beautiful, we might pick different people. We might pick similar attributes of we want them to be healthy, we want them to be smart. And there's are like attributes around it, but there's a specific something that we can recognize as beautiful. Um, and so, I mean, God has made everything beautiful in its time, which means that there is such a thing as beautiful and ugly. Um, and obviously, we are not spending a lot of time to focus on what's ugly because I'm sure you can decipher for yourself, and most people will. But I just think it's amazing that God has made everything beautiful in its time, and that we can express beauty in so many different ways, from even food. I mean, we look at food and there's so many people that can make beautiful food.
Yeah.
And I remember I love watching cooking shows, and there's one called Master Chef that Gordon Ramsay does. And he was commenting on someone's food. And he's like, "It's such a pity," and like they all like look so upset because he's not like being mean. He just looks so sad. And he's like, "It's so beautiful and it tastes so terrible that it makes the whole thing terrible."
Oh,
And it
wow.
just goes to show that it's not only about the beauty, but the function behind the beauty. So we see that God created beautiful things, but if they were just beautiful and they accomplished nothing, we'd be kind of left wanting. But the fact that God's beauty that he instills in this world accomplishes great and wonderful things makes it all the better.
I think another thing, as I'm sitting here thinking about this, I realize another reason why I have been so drawn to beauty of late. For one thing, I'm creative. I'm not an artist like you're, the people listening to this don't maybe don't know, but your brother is an amazing artist as far as being able to draw. Now he's got, devices he uses to do I don't know, everything from 3D stuff or whatever. Of course, today we have AI, you can make anything, but he's a great artist. I'm not an artist in far as drawing, but I've always been artistic. And so I've found expression in that through things like cinematography or graphic design at times. I'm an amateur at all of it, but it's still fun to dabble. But one of the things I love about photography is not just taking the picture, it's bringing it home, putting it in Lightroom, and then transforming it, because what you get out of the camera is different than what I post. And by the time I posted it, it's been meddled with, right? But it's all in the picture. It's information that's in the picture. You're just drawing things out and darkening some things, lightnings, bringing attention to certain things. And it's an art form. It's like I told my wife, it's more like painting, and it's beautiful. I love it. But one of the things I think, Cameron, I've kind of shared enough for people that have been watching us for a while will know I feel kind of like damaged goods these days, in the sense that I got so fed up with, the meanness of the church that I saw on social media, that I got to the point where I just didn't want to have anything more to do with it. From the standpoint of like engaging with people, I kind of got to the point where I was actually kind of concerned about myself, because I love people, but I got so tired of people being hateful to one another. And then, not only hateful to one another, but in a way in which the whole world was watching, right? And it just seemed like, in fact, I posted something the other day as a joke, and somebody had a really nasty comment. And so I just deleted it. It's not someone I know, it's some person I probably befriended or whatever. And usually when something like that happens, I'll go kind of check out, what's this person's issue? And almost always are very zealous religiously, and they've got 1,001 scriptures, but it's their job to keep everybody straight. And so I'd kind of made a joke about the rainbow, over my Jeep, saying clearly the rainbow is God's promise that the Wrangler is the greatest vehicle. And somebody posted a really nasty thing. Everybody took the joke for the most part. Everybody that knows me knows I love Jeeps. They took the joke and just enjoyed it. And this one nasty comment, so I delete the comment. I should have. Usually I'll unfriend a person who does that, but I don't think I did. I'm just so weary of that. I'm just trying to be fun and friendly. That's what social media is for, right? Not to correct everybody's theology. It's not a good platform for that. And I think the reason why I have gravitated to beauty and photography and just enjoying that is because it's absent the nastiness. There's a healing aspect to beauty, to art, to creativity. I remember I was listening years ago when Michael Bolton was big. Some of I don't know if you remember Michael Bolton, Cameron, but for a season I really liked his voice, and that gravelly kind of soul voice that he had. And one of the things he said, because he's a songwriter, and he was well known within the industry as a songwriter long before he was known for his own voice. And one of the things he said that caught him by surprise was the healing power of song. How many people wrote to him and told him, this song got me through when my wife had cancer, or I'd lost my parents, or it got me through. And we all have stories like that where either so I remember when I went through a very difficult time, it was actually watching movies of people going through something similar that was healing to me. It was like, it made me, it's like there's that beautiful line in the Shadowlands I've quoted many times, said, we read to know we're not alone. And sometimes art lets us know other people feel that way too. And like I said, it's a uniting thing, it's a healing thing. And there's something about just going out and seeing a beautiful I'm sitting here staring at one of these photos, mountainside with snow, beautiful clouds, trees, cattle grazing in the field, horses running up and down the hills. It's just healing. One of the reasons why I loved when I started going off-roading and getting out in nature was just even the beauty of the wind on my face. It was just healing to my soul. And today I have a very intense job, as you know, being a hospice chaplain. It can be very wearing on you, and everything in ministry can be very wearing on you. Sometimes the people in whom you have invested the most are the ones who um, cost you the most in a way. Sometimes the people I've spent the most time with were the ones who got really angry when I didn't perform to their expectations or whatever. And so you need something that you can get your head out of that world and be refreshed and be kind of made whole again. And I found for me, and I think a lot of people feel this way. That's why I think a lot of people that have got kind of burned out with people and sometimes even the church still worship God by doing it in solitude. And I'm not saying that that's justifiable. We still need the local church. We still need a fellowship of believers. But I do think there's something to be said about solitude in nature, enjoying beautiful things that is healing. And I think that we have, I say we, I shouldn't say we, I should say me. I think I've underestimated the value of those things in days gone by. Whereas as I age, I think I appreciate those simple things like just, I will stop. We have some flowers right outside our house that I don't know what they're called exactly. They're not yellow roses or not red roses. They are kind of a pinkish, and then they have yellow on the end of them, and they're just brilliant, beautiful roses. And every time they bloom, I take snapshots of them with my camera. I just can't get, and but I am one who appreciates aesthetics. And so there's something, I don't know, every time I see beauty, I have to stop and appreciate it. And like I said, I find it healing in a way. And I think other people do too. And I hope what we're doing tonight is giving maybe just language to things other people have felt, not maybe had the language to articulate, and maybe even felt guilty for taking a pleasure in. Well, I know it's not super spiritual just going to a museum or going to a concert or going to the theater, but I don't know, somehow it feeds my soul, it helps me. And I'm just we're just hopefully we're giving people license to appreciate beauty. And thank God there are beautiful Christian creators that are making beauty that is intentionally glorifying to God. But I think there's a lot of people that we could point to throughout history that were creative painters, composers, other people that have been creative, like some of the beautiful cathedrals, of course, architecture. There are many things that we create that we're still following and obeying that cultural mandate. We're making something of the world. And that inherently, I think, glorifies God, unless it's, directed to somehow not glorify him. I mean, the Tower of Babel didn't tickle God's fancy, but you know what I'm saying. I think there's something in the creative process that just glorifies God because, again, we're made in his likeness and image and we're doing what he does.
And there's the famous verse, Psalms 27:4, where it says, one thing I desire, that will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Why? To behold the beauty of the Lord. And there's just such truth to that God is the originator of beauty, and to behold his beauty is just wonderful and awe-inspiring. And I think one of the cool things about beauty is that it can come from unexpected sources. So growing up in Vermont, normally when I'd see a dandelion in our yard, it'd be one or two, and it'd be like, oh, crap, quickly get rid of them before they start spreading. And then there's weeds everywhere because my mom would love to do like a flower bed, and then we had to help like take care of it because and I've never been one for gardening, and I'm still not. Someday I think it'd be so much fun to learn a lot about plants, but it's just now is not it. Maybe when I'm retired one day I'll learn about plants and whatnot. But so I always grew up hating dandelions, because especially when they'd get to their puff phase where they'd spread everywhere and just be a nuisance. And that was until we moved to Taft, and the year we came was particularly rainy. And I remember we were driving from Bakersfield towards Taft, and the way the sun hit the like ground in the hills, they were dandelions in their like full bloom, lighting up the hillsides, and it was just yellow and beautiful. For those who don't know, yellow is my favorite color. And so to me, seeing like the yellow sun hit the yellow flowers and just look like fields of bright yellow was so beautiful. So beauty can come from unexpected sources, but at the same time, beauty often requires restraint, I think is what is also unique, because we find things that are beautiful in nature and we're never like frustrated with the beauty of the nature. But for example, we'll use photography since you've been getting into photography. You take a photo, and oftentimes, depending on what type of photo you take, if you take a raw image, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like it looks very muted in its colors, and it's because
Oh,
it takes
yeah.
what?
So you should only shoot in raw. Well, raw
Yeah,
raw is different than log. Log is
yeah,
where it's a flat color profile. Raw just means it retains all the information, so you
yeah.
can do a lot with manipulating the image.
But it still normally looks more muted through than what your eye sees. And oftentimes, when we go into editing softwares, what we are endeavoring to do is to show people what it looked like when we stood there, to show them the beauty that we saw with our eye. And so when my wife and I were getting ready to get married, um, we had our budget set out, and I ended up spending a good amount of our budget that we really didn't need to on a good videographer and good photographer. And the reason why was I looked through, gosh, over 30 photographers. And what I was looking for was someone that could shoot something and color it where it looked timeless and natural. And the reason why is because I went through so many photographers' albums and what do they call that?
Profiles.
No, it's where they have all their work displayed.
Oh yeah, like they're yeah,
Um
I know what you're saying. They're a
yeah. Oh, that word's
catalog
escaping
or
me now.
whatever. Yeah, but I know what
Yeah.
you mean. Yeah.
So I was looking through samples of their work, and every time I would see something that was unappealing, it was either normally because it was under color graded, which means the colors did not look accurate, or someone oversaturated and it looked gross and wrong. And there's so many times we've seen movies or pictures, and someone goes to, especially with young kids and teenagers, when they maybe not anymore, they've gotten a lot better at it. But I know when I was growing up, I'd see people post photos and they oversaturated the colors and it looked wrong and gross and they weren't natural. Um, and so it draws the beauty away from it. Same thing going back to cooking. You can cook something, for example, a dessert, but if you put too much sugar in it, we have an expression of sickly sweet, that it's so sweet it makes you feel sick. And I mean, there's times where I've like tasted something like, this is great. You take a second bite and you're like, I never want to take some.
Yeah.
Oh, funny story. We're gonna bring it up right now. So my dad decided to take me to See's Candy when I was, I think, in high school or maybe back from college one time. We go to the mall and we go to See's Candy, and I don't eat See's Candy because I'm not a candy person. I mean, there's some candies I like, but maybe more on the gummy side. I'm not a chocolate person. But we go to See's Candy, and I'm like, well, what do you normally get? And he's like, I love these things called Bordeaux bars, and he's like, they're really good. You should try one. And so he gets me one, and it's like this big. Maybe it's a little bigger, but
Real
it's
large.
it's a
It's like
small.
several pieces of See's candy all in one. Yeah.
It's like it's not that big though. It's like
It's
something that
rich.
you could pop in your mouth with one bite and easily. It'd be like throwing like maybe a one of those fun sized Kit Kats in your mouth, about that size. So we get into the car and he starts opening his and he's like struggling a little more because he's doing it while he's driving. And I open mine and I just pop the sucker in my mouth, and it was the most disgusting and horrible experience that I have ever had with candy to this day. And my dad's laughing because he's like, "What'd you do?" I'm like, "I ate the whole thing." He's like, "No, buddy, I normally cut these up into like 7 or 8 pieces and have them with coffee dough because they're so sweet and rich." And it's an example of something that is great and
Too much.
enjoyable for so many people. I've never gone back for it to enjoy it, but it is so great and enjoyable for so many people. But because I enjoyed it in the wrong context,
Right.
it was bad. And I want to say this about so many things that are beautiful can be enjoyed in the wrong context and be bad. Let's look at, we've used women as an example because we're using women because we're men and we're going to find women more attractive than men. But I can give examples. When I was in high school, I chose poorly to do things I shouldn't have because I saw what I was in that adolescent addled mind, uh, what I beheld was beautiful. And because of that, you want to get closer to it and interact with it. And same thing with people. A lot of people love bonfires because they think they're beautiful. You don't go and hug a bonfire and start taking that, and you'll get burned. And then when people start taking fire out of its enclosed context and start playing with it, forest fires happen. Same thing with young people when they're infatuated with beauty around them and they start wanting to interact with other young people, oftentimes bad things can happen. And so something that is beautiful requires one restraint on the part of the beauty. So, like I said, with the sweets and the colors, not to overdo them, but also when you interact with beauty, it has a purpose and it has a design intended for it. And it's not to be interacted with in an incorrect way, because when you do, it backfires. And this goes back again to saying that, like the guardrails, you wouldn't try to go close to the guardrails just for fun. Beauty has a respected way to interact with it. And I think it's our job and our responsibility. And even, for example, I'm very conservative, but one thing I do agree with on, I'd say, the left more often. It's not that I would say the right doesn't care about it, but I care about things being clean, like cleaning the oceans, cleaning like environment. And it's not from like I'm paranoid about different levels of different things. What I do see is there's a lot of plastic and trash in the ocean. There's a lot of plastic and trash on the side of our road. There's a lot of just junk and trash that people leave everywhere, and it looks bad, and it's bad for our environment. It's bad for like all these different things. So for me, it's God gave us this world. We should tend to it and care to it. It is something that is beauty and beautiful, and it should be treated with respect and cared for so that beauty can continue to last.
Yeah, I always say this way, I'm not an environmentalist, but I am a conservationist. And so most off-roaders are, they'll go out. I saw it watching one of my favorite off-roaders the other day, and he had this huge bag of like stuff in the back of his truck. And what he'd done is as he was out enjoying the outback, if you will, in Southern California, he was also picking up other people's trash, which was wonderful of him to do. But um, by the way, the word you were looking for earlier was portfolio, a photographer's portfolio. That's it.
Yeah,
Um,
portfolio.
anyway, your last birthday, which was real recently, I almost sent you a Bordeaux bar. I was so going to do it, and I forgot to go to Sears and get one. But I went in one day, and I saw the Bordeaux bar, and I just started laughing out loud. I told my wife, "I'm sending Cameron a Bordeaux bar."
Oh
But anyway,
God.
yeah, that's a really good point, Cameron, about things in moderation. And I think another thing that strikes me about beauty that as you were talking, I began to think about it. I'm into photography right now, and I love watching. I love the process of making beautiful photos. I really appreciate the art that goes into other people making their photos. So I thought about it. There are museums with different kinds of art that maybe would not intrigue me. And then there are some people who like different kinds of art, like architecture is an art, right? And they could just go around a large city looking at different buildings all day. I'm kind of like that. I love architecture. I like old houses, like kind of like Vermont style homes, right? That whatever that is, colonial kind of architecture and so forth and so on that's back there. Cathedrals are beautiful. You go over to Europe, man. I mean, it's funny because you go to Austria and it's very similar to Vermont in topography. You got, the forest land and you these wide sweeping meadows. The only difference is like in the cleft of a couple of hills, you'll have a 500-year-old village, there in Austria. And I went up in the Austrian Alps, right outside of where The Sound of Music was filmed there. It was beautiful, and again, but some people like that kind of beauty. Other people look, like I said, they go to a car show and see, the flames on the side of a car or whatever, whatever. And they see beauty in that. But to me, what that speaks to is the limitless array of beauty. Again, it speaks to the hugeness, the largeness of God, the variety. The Bible talks about the manifold wisdom of God, the manifold grace of God. And I think when it comes to aesthetics, there is that manifold beauty of God. And the Bible even says, I think it's Ephesians 2:7, that throughout the ages to come, he will continue to show the riches of his grace and his kindness toward us. There's always going to be new facets of God's nature and character and wisdom and creativity. God never comes to an end. And so we'll have eternity to enjoy the beauty of creation because creation extends beyond this world we're living in now. And who knows, there is an enormous, literally, almost, I can't say limitless because I believe the universe is finite, but let's just say fundamentally where we're sitting, infinite universe. I mean, the universe is so massive, words fail to describe how huge our universe is. And who knows, God may have a plan in the eternities yet to come for all those planets and star systems. And who knows, maybe we'll be, I don't know, decorating them or, otherwise, inhabiting them. And who knows? But I just know this, that God has limitless creative power, limitless creative imagination, and we're all to some degree partakers in it. And that's the last thing I'll say is that what's another thing that's beautiful about beauty is that everyone can participate. Not maybe not in the same way. I don't draw. I'm limited on my computer skills, but there's a way in which all of us can somehow participate in beauty. One of the things I love to see is when there's a beautification project, when people go through a city, for example, and take a block of the downtown area, clean up all the trash, paint the side of a wall, and sometimes you get these street painters who are exceedingly talented, and they'll paint the side of the building with some kind of mural. I love that kind of stuff, but it speaks to beauty, art, creativity. And I think this is something that in our world now, Cameron, where there's so much divisiveness, so much, contention, so much anger, even in the church, you see all this angst, people wanting to correct everybody, and you got to be on my side, you got to see it the way I do. And I think that there's something to be said for, again, that unity. Everybody standing on their porch, looking at a beautiful sunset, can all agree to that. And I think there's something about art and beauty and creativity, all these things. It's a lot of things lumped up into this idea of beauty that we can all agree upon. And I think we need to celebrate it. I think we need to make a bigger deal out of it. And I think we need to show the world we understand it and can participate in it, because I think a lot of times we're just seen as kind of like the moral police of the world, and while we are to some degree to hold up that standard of righteousness, God is, as you said earlier, beautiful. And I think if we fail to point out God's beauty, all we'll be pointing people to are rules, because God's righteousness is not absent his beauty. And I think if we strip the beauty away and just make it, rules and regulations, and you must do this, you must do that, and here's the standard. And don't get me wrong, we as believers particularly hold to a certain standard, but we're not drawn to God because of rules and regulations. We're drawn to God because of beauty, because of love, because of compassion, because of grace. And I think aesthetics, creativity, emphasize those things and draw the world inexorably to God.
I think my last comment would be similarly to if someone says that was wrong, they're immediately implying morality, because wrong and right don't exist without an objective moral lawgiver. All you can say is, I don't like that, or I do like that. If someone says something's bad or good, they're implying a moral lawgiver, a imposer. Same thing with true or false, that there's an objective morality of true and false. And lastly, same with what we've been talking about. If someone says something that is beautiful, because the world does often try to say there is no true beauty, it is just our objective preference, or our subjective preference, I mean. But there is an objective beautiful. There are certain things that we all find beautiful, and some things that we find ugly. And sometimes the ugly things are not physically seen things, but the personalities, different people that we recognize, wow, that was an ugly personality trait. And so when we use beauty and ugly, we are essentially still stating that there is an objective creator that has instilled beauty into this world, and by which we can measure and give metric to that beauty. So all of these, the good, the beautiful, and the true, they infer that there is an objective creator outside of all of us that has set out guidelines and a lens through which to interpret these
Yeah.
facets of our world.
Yeah, there's a transcendency in all of these things. All these things point to something else. They point to the transcendent. Again, C.S. Lewis, if I find within myself desires that nothing in this world can fulfill, it can only mean that I'm made for another world. And I think all of these things point us to something else, because all these things are only here in measure. Beauty is only here in measure. Righteousness, we only see it because we're in a fallen world. But we know inherently there's something better, bigger, beyond. you know, I used to work so hard, Cameron, coming up with all these arguments against atheism. And then it dawned on me one day, atheism only really represents about what, something like 7% of people in the world. And usually, for the most part, in the West, where we've allowed, you know, scientific rationalism to talk us out of what a little child even knows. And so I think that we need to find in the church better arguments, some broader arguments to appeal to a wider group of people. I think beauty can be one of the things that really do that. And there are times where God draws us to himself through something beautiful, and we don't even know what's happening because we don't necessarily have the language to express it. It's not something that's rational, it's more intuitive, but it works on us. And that's the important thing. And God oftentimes works in the shadows, and sometimes it's through creativity and beauty. So, well, thanks everybody for kind of listening to our ramblings about this. This is something that I think is important. It's something that God is opening up in me. You know, for all my love of creativity, I've spent a lot of my life in a rational world, you know, preaching truth and, you know, critical thinking and all this kind of stuff has absorbed a lot of my time, particularly in the last decade plus with like apologetics and things like that. And there's something beautiful, like I said, almost where I was like, am I doing something wrong by enjoying this? And I think God was come maybe throwing me a lifeline to say, hey, this could be me. And you know, if we can become skillful in this area, Cameron, I think it opens up another potential realm of evangelism, very different than what we've thought of before in many ways, but still very, very real and something that touches the human heart beyond the endless, sneaks past those watchful dragons, as C.S. Lewis said. So, why don't you lead us in prayer?
Lord, we thank you that you are a God that has instilled creativity within us, that you have set out things that are beautiful that we can pursue. We pray that you are opening our hearts and our minds to new levels of creativity to express beauty in ways that we had never considered, whether that's for the purposes of evangelism or just to help people grow closer to you or to build within ourselves a greater understanding of how beautiful you are. We thank you that you're instilling this creativity and developing it, and that it's going to flourish into something wonderful. We thank you that we can inspire others and bring them alongside us in this journey. We thank you, Lord, for everything you're doing in and through us. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We won't be here next week. It's next week is Valentine's Day, and we'll be kissing up to our wives. We'll be spending quality time with our loved ones, so we'll be doing something that is beautiful. But anyway, we will be back the following week, so we hope you'll join us. And again, we want to invite you go to the website randylanebunch.org under the media link. All the previous 84 broadcasts are there, and as well as lots of other. Just keep scrolling. There's hundreds and hundreds of videos. And in addition to that, a lot of other resources there on the website that'll be a blessing to you. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we will see you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.